How you doing, everyone? And welcome to Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. And this is the RGM 79Q Jim Quel, the dreaded first mass-produced mobile suit for the infamous Earth Federation Special Forces unit, the Titans. And welcome back to Gundam Lore on Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More. The Jim Quel is a very interesting mobile suit. In game terms, the Jim Quel is basically a raid version of the Jim Custom, and so it has a shield, good maneuverability characteristics, decent firepower, but it does extra damage against support units, but it is rather weak against the fairly ubiquitous general purpose mobile suits that are found in the game, and I believe that its weaponry is a little lackluster when compared to other Jim models, but this is a very interesting unit as far as lore is concerned because it is the first mass-produced mobile suit for the dreaded Titans. So what are the Titans and how did they come about? And this is very interesting because the Gundam Universal Century timeline typically does not retcon very much or reboot their franchise or change too much. They like to keep the story going, and the story is very creative and tends to mimic or follow the tendencies of human history while incorporating the giant stompy robots called mobile suits that we all like when we play the game and watch the anime and movies. So most people are familiar with the 1 Year War, in which the Gundam was the main mobile suit and the focus of the original anime, and Amuro Ray, the pilot of the Gundam, was the main protagonist of the series and the first new type to be introduced into the series. But the series continued with many side stories because the universe was very rich and large, and the scale of combat was completely unprecedented. One of the most popular side stories to the franchise is one of my favorite anime series of all time, Mobile Suit Gundam 0083 Stardust Memory. And this is an anime about desperation, very bad choices, and how sometimes a few critical mistakes and bad judgment calls and corrupt individuals can change the course of history, oftentimes for the worst. So the 1 Year War, of course, lasted 1 year and saw Side 3, the cluster of colonies farthest from the Earth, declare their independence most violently after their government was usurped by a very corrupt fascist family known as the Sabis, who assassinated a very interesting man named Zeon Zumdaikun, who is the father of Char Aznable. Spoilers there, but it's been 40 years. If you haven't seen Gundam, you really should. And so Zeon Zumdaikun was an activist who proposed a peaceful transition of power to those that are in space and can govern themselves while still respecting the boundaries and the economic inclusion of the Earth government, which is the Earth Federation. He was assassinated, and his followers were then taken control of by this very corrupt family. They launched their attack and did devastating damage. The war killed literally billions and saw many of the fragile colonies in space destroyed, and also included a colony drop and the use of nuclear weapons, which were later banned in the war and created many casualties, and the complete change of ecosystem of the Australian country slash continent as the colony missed its intended target and landed in Sydney, Australia, and did quite a bit of damage to the fragile ecosystem of Earth. This is very important later on. So, the 1 Year War eventually concluded with the defeat of Zeon, and the surviving Zeon forces fled their homeland. Most of them, including the last surviving heir to the Zabi family, went to the mining colony known as Axis, the asteroid Axis. The remaining citizens of Side 3 were called the Zeon Republic, and they were a puppet state of the Earth Federation. The Earth Federation had an opportunity to really tighten the chains and the reins, but decided to be their normal, corrupt, red tape, bureaucratic selves and just continue with the status quo. Some forces went to Axis and then later left, but other forces decided not to join the Axis Zeon and try to remake the Principality of Zeon, and decided to just burn with hatred and revenge and hide away, waiting for an opportunity to get their revenge on the Earth Federation. And this is the start of the tragedy of Zeta Gundam. This is where it really all goes wrong. Admiral Delas, who is considerably loyal to the father of the Sabi family and the main leader of the Sabi family, Giran Zabi, and of course Giran Zabi was a complete nut, much like Adolf Hitler, wound up killing his father, and one of his siblings then slew him for the crime of patricide, and this drove the completely naive, idealistic, and overly zealous Admiral Delas to flee the Battle of Abaoku, the last battle of the One-Year War, and take most of the very, very elite forces of Zeon with him, including the Nightmare of Solomon, Annabelle Gato, which we will get to later on. These forces decided to hide out for 3 years and then struck during Operation Stardust, in which they stole one of the brand new Gundams and perpetrated an act of complete revenge using a weapon of mass destruction on the Federation fleet, and then decided to steal a colony and drop it on Earth. It did disrupt the Federation's food supply, create a sense of fear and havoc, and made Zeon and the remnants of Zeon the permanent enemies of the citizens of Earth, as this was the final straw. This weapon of mass destruction used not once, not twice, but 3 separate times by Zeon and the remnants of Zeon. And these were most definitely not in the name of war. These were terrorist actions. And furthermore, this would have repercussions later on, because this elite force, even though they managed to do the impossible with relatively small numbers when compared to the conflicts of the One-Year War, they squandered their resources and were almost slain down to the last man in their attempt to do this terrorist action. And this really weakened the Axis Zeon, which had an opportunity, if things had changed and the major players on the Zeon side had matured and decided to not use war and terrorism to further their aims, which many of them didn't want to. They could have built a very strong nation to rival the military of the Earth Federation and peaceably regain power, and maybe even regain their homeland after a set period of time that was established by the treaties that ended the One-Year War. In fact, this action and the action of some of the more warlike Axis Zeon forces forced Char and many veterans who would follow him to later leave Axis, which would further drive Axis farther away from the Earth Sphere and the Earth Federation, almost guaranteeing war in the future, which is just a tragedy. So had the Delas fleet stayed as the home guard of Axis Zeon, and had Char Aznable stayed with Axis Zeon and guided them with his charisma and personality, and if they all cared for Minerva Zabi, the last heir of the Zabi family, and taught her the true meaning of being a space noid with the teachings of Zeon Zemdaiken, history could have been completely different. But it wasn't, and so the stage is set for Zeta Gundam. This terrorist action that killed many, many Federation pilots, destroyed many, many ships, crippled the agriculture of the Earth, and created so much havoc and damage that the Earth Federation started going down the path of authoritarianism, using fear as an instrument for very corrupt politicians to gain power, and also this fear throughout the Earth Federation citizenry really led to some of the tragedies that happened in Zeta Gundam, which all could have been avoided. So, the elite forces, ironically, that tried to stop the last Blitz of Zeon during Operation Stardust, their machinery and many of these pilots were used to form the basis of an elite anti-Zeon, anti-terrorism unit called the Titans. And the leaders of the Titans happened to be some of the most corrupt individuals in the Earth Federation, and they took this opportunity to grab power. And these individuals, and I don't want to bring too many spoilers from the Stardust Memory anime, but these individuals were playing both sides, as well as many corrupt individuals on Luna for Anaheim Electronics, the old corporation of the Zeonic Corporation, which was the main manufacturer of mobile suits for the Republic or the Principality of Zeon. There was a lot of politics behind the scene, a lot of backstabbing, and a lot of power grabbing, and that made the situation infinitely worse. So the Titans now had all this power, all this funding to do whatever they want, and they played the populace's fear of colony drops and the resurrection of Zeon and space noids in general to just do whatever they want. They had a blank check to do whatever they want. And this elite unit, even though many members started as just veteran and elite Federation pilots, began to act as jackbooted thugs. They were now basically a secret police that were given the authority to use force, deadly force, unbelievable force if necessary, to stop other colony drops, nuclear attacks, or mass destructive terrorism that may be perpetrated by Zeon or anyone else that would like to gain independence from Earth or just poke Earth in the eye in any way, shape, or form. On the surface, through the use of propaganda, everything went well for about a year or so. And of course, when they needed a mobile suit to stand out head and shoulders above the common ranked GEMs for the Earth Federation main space forces, they chose the GEM Custom, which was a elite mobile suit usually only given to ace pilots. It had very good characteristics, it had very good armor, very good weaponry lore-wise, and they decided to streamline this unit, which really didn't have much of a production run. It was only really given to aces and commanders. They decided to streamline production, make it lighter, give it newer technologies, and give a very solid mobile suit to the Titans pilots. By the time of the events of Zeta Gundam, this mobile suit was a little outdated, but it was still used by the lower rank and file for garrison forces, policing of the population. So this mobile suit was almost a symbol of the Titans. But by the time the events of Zeta Gundam happened, the Zeonic Company was already making mobile suits for the Titans, and so was Anaheim Electronics, and they were introducing much more advanced mobile suits like the Hyzak, the Murasai, and these mobile suits were very, very powerful, probably better than the original Gundam, and they were given to the most offensive and elite units of the Titans. So, the Titans eventually overstepped their bounds and became such a police state and so authoritarian, and they had become so corrupt in the Earth Federation government, using power and threats and force to intimidate the Earth Federation government, that eventually it culminated into them becoming what they originally sought to patrol against and destroy, and they began to use very, very deadly, awful methods to control the population of the colonies in space and even on Earth. And this led to a rebellion in which both Federation pilots and officers and old Zeon pilots and officers, along with many countries of Earth who had just had it with this kind of tyranny, formed the Anti-Earth Union Group, or AUG, and Karaba, which was the rebellion group on Earth. and they eventually fought the Titans and brought all of their evil actions to light. And once the general public, finally understood the monster they had created because of their fear of an organization that really had just petered out. The last blitz of Zeon, the colony drop in Operation Stardust, was really the only thing the old Zeon had left, and they had expended all their assets to do this one mission, and now they were vilifying Axis Zeon, which was just pushing them further and further into conflict, and they started researching more powerful weaponry. And of course, they were being supported by corporations that wanted to see war. They wanted to see challengers to arrive to give the Earth Federation a hard time and to make war and to keep defense and military contracts going. It was just really a bad time for everybody. And eventually the Titans were defeated. And again, what's really weird is the unit that defeated the Titans, the AU, later became the new anti-terrorism, anti-Zeon organization called Londo Bell, except this time with proper leadership and honorable soldiers. Londo Bell was what the Titans were originally supposed to be, an elite unit with the best mobile suits the Earth Federation had, that were a rapid response force whenever some sort of threat of weapon of mass destruction or terrorism or Zeon came back to cause problems. They were there, and even though they didn't always win, they always bought time for the heroes or protagonists of the series to get in there and do what needed to be done. But the Jim Quel is quite an interesting mobile suit. It's not going to get you the best stats, that's for sure. Its problem is it's using weapons that I kind of like, the Jim rifle and the Jim 2 beam gun, but to tell you the truth, these weapons have flaws and are very lackluster. And if you pit this mobile suit, unless you're really, really good like Silver Lightning, if you pit this mobile suit against other Jims in the general use mobile suit categories, it's not going to fare well. It can hold its own, but it's not going to fare well. But it's got 3 hits, excellent maneuverability, so you can go in there and stun with the Jim 2 beam rifle, especially supports, and get 3 devastating hits, or you can use the Jim rifle to just grind down a support's hit points and just grind right through them and do a lot of damage. It also has a normal grenade for damage, and it also has a flashbang for an additional stun. So it's a really cool mobile suit. I really like it. It's just not the best, and it's an interesting, fun mobile suit to take out and experiment with, but be careful when you're taking on general use mobile suits, because this thing is not really equipped to take on those type of mobile suits, but it can hold its own. But it's really good at hunting down support mobile suits. It's just not the best, but it's a really interesting mobile suit as far as lore and the Titans, and it's also a cool looking mobile suit, and it has decent stats, and I'm glad I got it on a random loot drop. Well, I think that'll conclude our little lore segment on the Jim Quel, a little known mobile suit from a lesser known Universal Century Gundam cartoon series, but it's very interesting and a critical piece of lore in the Universal Century Gundam timeline. Well, that's it for me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.